He didn't just kill, he hunted, he controlled. He strangled the life out of his victims with his bare hands, then left their bodies in the woods like discarded trash. And the scariest part? He blended in. A church-going husband, a father, a factory worker. No one saw the monster beneath the mask until it was too late. This is the story of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. Gary Ridgway was born in 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah. From the outside, his childhood looked ordinary, but beneath the surface there were signs, deep, disturbing signs that something was wrong. His mother, Mary, was domineering, controlling, and cruel. She ruled the household with an iron grip, humiliating her sons, especially Gary. She bathed him well into his teenage years, scrubbing him aggressively, berating him for wetting the bed, and when he did, she would shame him, making him feel small, weak. This mix of fear, shame, and forbidden desire created a toxic storm inside him. He later admitted he had conflicting feelings about his mother. Hate, love, lust, rage, a dangerous combination. And then, the fantasies started. Ridgway was slow in school. His IQ was just 82. But what he lacked in intelligence, he made up for in manipulation. He hid his darkness well, until he couldn't. He struggled in school, barely passing. But what stood out was his anger, his growing need for control. At 16, he lured a 6-year-old into the woods, held him down, stabbed him in the ribs. As the boy bled, Ridgway watched, fascinated. The child survived, but Ridgway didn't panic, didn't flee. He just walked away, cold, detached. It should have been the first red flag, but nothing happened. No consequences, no real punishment. And deep inside him, something grew. A need to kill. In 1969, Ridgway joined the Navy and was sent to Vietnam. While overseas, he spent his free time in brothels, developing a dangerous addiction to sex. But when he came home, something had changed. He was married, but he was obsessed with prostitutes. He would drive for hours, picking them up, paying for sex, sometimes multiple times a day. He hated them, but he couldn't stay away. And soon, sex wasn't enough. He needed more. It was July 1982 when Ridgway's bloodlust finally erupted. He had visited prostitutes before, countless times. But this time, he didn't just want sex. He wanted power, control, to see the life drain from her eyes. The night was like any other. The offer was simple: money for a ride for a few minutes of her time. She got into the truck, not knowing it would be her last ride. For years, Gary Ridgway had fantasized about this moment. He had dreamed of taking a life, holding it in his hands, watching it slip away. But fantasizing wasn't enough anymore. He needed more. And he knew exactly where to find his victims. He didn't pick women at random. He chose them carefully. Women who wouldn't be missed. Women who lived on the fringes of society. Prostitutes, runaways, drifters. They trusted too easily, accepted rides from strangers, and most importantly, they wouldn't put up a fight. Ridgway knew exactly how to lure them in. He acted polite, soft-spoken, non-threatening. He paid for their time, made them feel safe. But the moment they let their guard down, he struck. Gary Ridgway's first confirmed victim was 16-year-old Wendy Caulfield. The attack is sudden, violent. His hands shoot out, clamping around her throat. She gasps, thrashes, but he's strong, stronger than she expected. He had learned from experience. Strangulation was the cleanest way. No blood, no noise, no evidence. Her fingers claw at his arms. Her feet kick against the dashboard. But his grip tightens. His knuckles turn white. He doesn't speak, doesn't break a sweat. He just watches until the light fades from her eyes. Beat. Silence. Her body goes limp in his hands. He had done it. He had killed. And now, he couldn't stop. Without hesitation, he dumps her in a riverbank. Watches as the current pulls her away. And just like that, the Green River Killer was born. With that first kill, something inside him changed. The hesitation was gone. The doubt erased. Now, killing was part of his routine, like clockwork. July 15th, 1982. The body of 16-year-old Wendy Caulfield was pulled from the Green River. She had been strangled, dumped, left to rot in the current. Police knew they had a murder on their hands. What they didn't know was that this was just the beginning. Gary Ridgway had killed for the first time, and now he was hungry for more. Ridgway didn't slow down. If anything, he became more efficient, more confident. The thrill of that first kill had awakened something in him, and now he needed to feed it. He developed a pattern. He would cruise Pacific Highway South, searching for women, mostly prostitutes, runaways, or teenage girls who had no one looking for them. He acted friendly, harmless, a nice guy. But the moment they were alone, the mask came off. Gary Ridgway's second confirmed victim was Deborah Lynn Bonner, a 23-year-old woman last seen on July 25, 1982, just 10 days after Wendy Caulfield's body was found. Like Caulfield, Bonner was a sex worker. She was last seen near Pacific Highway South, an area Ridgway frequently prowled. He picked her up, likely using his usual trick, acting polite, offering money, and pretending to be just another customer. Once she was in his truck, the pattern was the same. He strangled her with his bare hands until she lost consciousness. He may have revived her briefly. Ridgway later admitted to sometimes letting victims wake up before finishing them off. Once she was dead, he drove her body to the Green River and dumped her, just like his first victim. Discovery of her body. On August 12, 1982, her remains were pulled from the Green River, not far from where Wendy Caulfield had been found. By now, it was obvious. A serial killer was on the loose. Ridgway's confidence was growing. He had killed twice in the same month, and no one had any idea who he was. Soon, the real spree would begin. By September 1982, 5 bodies had surfaced in or around the river. Police knew they had a serial killer on their hands. The media gave him a name: the Green River Killer. Detectives knew the killings were connected. All the victims were young women, all strangled, all dumped in remote locations. But they had no leads, no suspects. The Green River Killer seemed to vanish into thin air after every murder. Ridgway was meticulous. He took precautions. He made sure his truck was clean. He never brought victims to his home. He dumped their clothes far from their bodies to throw off the investigation. And the biggest advantage? His victims were often seen getting into different cars every night. No one could say for sure who had picked them up. The police were chasing a ghost. He sits at the dinner table with his wife, Marcia. He smiles. Normal. Ordinary. But outside, the body count is rising. Ridgway was living a double life. To the world, he was a mild-mannered truck painter, a husband, a stepfather. But at night, he was hunting. By the end of 1983, at least 15 women had been murdered. More had disappeared. He got bolder, taking multiple victims in a single week. He didn't just kill, he collected. He had dumping grounds, clusters of bodies, hidden in the dense forests of Washington. And the worst part? He came back to visit them. Sometimes days later he returned, to relive the kill, to violate the remains. It wasn't just about murder anymore. It was about control, dominance, ownership. Gary Ridgway wasn't a criminal mastermind, but he knew how to disappear. He was forgettable, ordinary, the last person anyone would suspect. He was questioned in 1983. A prostitute had reported him for being rough, but there was no evidence, no body, no arrest. In 1984, police finally bring Ridgway in for a polygraph test. He sits calmly, hands folded. The machine beeps. Ridgway doesn't blink. The machine stays steady. He passed, and just like that, they let him go. And so the killing continued. More women disappear. Their faces flash on news bulletins. Their bodies turn up in forests, ravines, under bridges. By 1985, the number had climbed past 30. No arrests, no solid leads. Just whispers, theories, and more victims. The Green River Task Force was formed. They had one mission: find the killer. But Ridgway was always one step ahead. He had perfected his method. He changed his tactics, spread out his dump sites, picked up women in different areas to avoid suspicion. He even started bringing victims home, strangling them in his bedroom while his wife slept in the next room. And through it all, he felt nothing. Victims ranged from 15 to their early 30s. Many had one thing in common. They were last seen getting into a dark pickup truck. Ridgway blended in. A factory worker, a churchgoer, a father. When police looked at him, they didn't see a predator. They saw a boring, middle-aged man. By 1987, the Green River case had gone cold, but investigators weren't giving up. They went back over their list of potential suspects, and one name kept standing out: Gary Ridgway. Detectives noticed that Ridgway had been seen with multiple victims before they disappeared. He had a history of violence towards sex workers. And then, a crucial lead. In 1984, a witness had seen one of the victims get into Ridgway's truck. That was enough to bring him back in. In April 1987, police searched his home and truck. They took carpet fibers, paint samples, even clothing. And most importantly, they took a saliva sample for future DNA testing. Ridgway kept calm, cooperated. He thought he was in the clear, and once again, he walked free. Science was evolving. DNA was still in its infancy, but detectives were thinking ahead. They took a sample from Ridgway, stored it just in case. He wasn't arrested, but the noose was tightening, and he had no idea. Decades passed. Ridgway kept killing until he didn't. The body stopped. The investigation slowed. But then technology caught up to him. That DNA sample, it was finally tested, matched to 3 victims: Wendy Caulfield, Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, and then everything unraveled. November 30th, 2001, Gary Ridgway was arrested, and when the interrogation began, the mask finally fell. For years they had chased a phantom, but now he was in front of them. And when Ridgway finally spoke, his words sent chills through the room. Ridgway, I killed so many women I lost count. A detective swallows hard, gripping a pen. 49 confirmed victims, but Ridgway himself admitted it was likely closer to 70, maybe even more. He had choked the life out of them with his bare hands, and he felt nothing. Ridgway says, "Murder was my career. I thought I was doing the world a favor." Silence, a heavy pause. And that was it. The Green River Killer was caught. Not by an eyewitness, not by a mistake in the moment, but by time, by science, by his own arrogance. He had believed he was untouchable, but in the end, no one is. In 2003, Gary Ridgway was sentenced to life in prison without parole. A deal was made. His life in exchange for helping recover missing bodies. He is still behind bars, still alive, but his name will forever be tied to horror, and the voices of the women he silenced will never be forgotten. If you think monsters don't exist, think again. Gary Ridgway was one of the most prolific serial killers in history, hiding in plain sight. What other secrets lie buried, waiting to be unearthed? Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notification, because the darkness is far from over. And in our next episode, we're going even deeper. Comment what you think of this case. Do you think his childhood made him who he became? Did his dad's words encourage him to do what he did? Until next time on the Dark Side Diaries.